We talk about who is really calling the shots in the Biden administration. When you have this man who, all of America saw how with it he was during that first debate with President Trump in 2024. Well, who is really calling the shots? How did the President of the United States, theoretically the most powerful man on earth, get forced to drop out of a presidential election? Part of my answer to that is this vast network of these dark money funders like George and Alex Soros, Arabella Advisors, and the nonprofits they created. The really powerful money behind the Democratic Party colluding with all of these nonprofits. I hope that my book has the research to lift back the curtain and show what exactly was going on and why it didn't seem to matter to so many people on the left that the president was barely there.
All right, guys, we've made it through the week 2 of the Trump administration. Obviously, not the week that we wanted to end with, but a lot happening with the confirmations, etc. President yesterday addressing the nation on that horrific tragedy that happened just over the Potomac River. Continues to bring a whole of government approach to finding out. I think Sean Duffy at the podium and Pete Hegseth pledging to get action and results on what the investigation yields as quick as possible. Anyway, it's interesting, though, because in the press conference, President Trump specifically talked about DEI, the agency like the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. And I was thinking how perfectly timed it was to today's guest. Now, we don't know if that had anything to do with anything, if this was just pilot error, or if any of the policies that led up to DEI transforming the FAA that President Trump was talking about have anything. But we are going to have an amazing discussion today from Tyler O'Neill of the Daily Signal. And Tyler has written a whole new book about DEI in the federal government. But here's where you're going to find something that you're not going to hear anywhere else, is how pervasive it is. So these guys aren't just doing it. These unelected bureaucrats are being influenced by groups like Arabella Advisors and the teachers union, whatever. It is a big, big deal what they're doing to change our life, because we always think we're influencing Congress to make changes or the administration, but it's these unelected bureaucrats and who's influencing them that really make a big difference. So we're keeping an eye on the confirmations, keeping an eye on this whole government response. As I say, today on Friday, we put out the newsletter, SeanSpicer.com. So check it out, sign up for it. VIP memberships are always welcome, but it is free. So you are more than welcome to just sign up, take the insights, publish twice a week. I am able to expand on things that I don't have time for on the show sometimes, put some behind the scenes pictures. Anyway, check it out. Before I get to this great conversation with Tyler, I want to tell you, every year we make New Year's resolutions to do something different. And one of the things that I'm hoping you'll do, we voted for change in November at the ballot box, but I think we should start voting for change with our wallets, aligning ourselves with products and companies that mirror our values. And I did this last year. I switched over to Wire to Fish Coffee. I make it, we have people over. I use it for iced coffee. It's amazing. You can see the bag. Like, I crush this thing at holidays, big pots. When people come over to the house, I love it. And like I said, I make a bunch. I put it and save it for iced coffee for the week. And here's the kicker. They give 25% of their profits to faith-based and clean water initiatives. It's amazing. You feel like you're actually not only enjoying a good cup of coffee, but one that aligns with your values. And if you can now start your day, not just with a cup of coffee, but check this out, folks. This is the Wire to Fish customized Yeti. And on one side, Wire to Fish. On the other side, the Sean Spicer Show. I have one. I mean, I only got one. If you want your own, you can get this by going to wire2fish.com. It's the numeral 2, wire2fish.com. Use code WeCare for 10% off your first order and start 2025 off with a cup of coffee that aligns with your values. Also, speaking of your time in 2025, if you are the person that's in charge of your company expenses, so you run it or you're in charge of that aspect of it, whether you got 5 or 5,000 employees, you need to get yourself one of these. It's a Ramp card. See, it says Ramp on one side, Visa on the other. It's just like a Visa card in any other situation, except this will streamline your businesses. It automates your expenses. It's an unbelievable game changer when it comes to how you run your business. They issue you virtual cards and physical ones. One of the guests on I had a few months ago switched his whole company over to Ramp, and he was like, dude, it's amazing what it does. You don't have to chase around receipts anymore. You use this. You can set limits on what employees can spend. You're not spending your hours chasing down receipts and doing expense reports anymore. It's easy to use, easy to get started. In only 15 minutes, you can get going. And right now, you get $250 in your pocket when you join Ramp. Just go to ramp.com/Spicer, ramp.com/Spicer. Cards are issued by Sutton and Celtic Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. All right, it's my pleasure to bring in Tyler O'Neill, the managing editor over there at the Daily Signal and the author of the brand new book, Woketopus, which exposes how DEI has infiltrated our unelected officials in our government. Take a look. Tyler, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Congrats on the book. This has always been a fascinating subject for me because I feel like we don't have the same ecosystem that they do. And you kind of address it in the book, talk about the Cokes, but they're particular about what they care about. And the network that the left has built is fascinating. And so just start for a second and explain, like, I want to get to the chart in your book. So just know that I want to get there because I thought it was fascinating. Yes. I mean, it's an eye bender for those. We'll put it up for everyone to see, but you really need the book to see how all this drop down stuff goes. But if there's one takeaway that you want from people to get after they read this book, what is it?
Yeah, it's that the woke forces that are being pushed by elites like George and Alex Soros are influencing and weaponizing the federal government. And this influence campaign, even though Trump is in office again now, it's not going to go away. The woke activist groups that achieved all of that during Biden are standing in the wings, creating a government in exile and preparing to step back in as soon as there's another left-wing president. And we have the deep state gearing up. And I think many of those woke bureaucrats who worked with these nonprofits are going to be part of the efforts to fight Trump in the new administration.
You know, at one point in the book, I made a note. You described, I mean, I forgot how you just said it now, but in the book, you talk about a shadow government and that it's not what we learned in school. Explain more in detail for those people who haven't read the book. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think this is something most Americans, if you're lucky enough to learn about the Constitution in school, I realize that I'm actually one of those lucky enough to do that. I thought most people did, but apparently that's not everybody's experience, which is a sad commentary in itself. But the way the Constitution was set up, you have three co-equal branches of government. Really, I mean, the legislative branch is meant to be the main powerhouse. The executive branch fulfills the laws that the legislative branch writes, and then the Supreme Court adjudicates disputes. And you have this really great system the founders created to enable majority rule while protecting minority rights. All of that essentially was thrown out the window. Now we have an administrative state, a vast bureaucracy that writes far more of the rules that you and I have to live by than Congress passes laws. So the bureaucracy passes stacks and stacks of regulation. Congress passes a few laws every year. It doesn't even come close. And this bureaucracy is the institution that these woke activist groups easily infiltrate and influence, and then they use that bureaucracy to force their ideas on the American people.
So essentially what I took away from reading this is it's almost like we're looking at the wrong thing, that everyone tries to influence Congress. But in reality,
yes,
it's these woke bureaucrats that are making decisions that impact our lives. And while we're all focused over here, like, let's look at what Congress is doing, these woke bureaucrats have been infiltrated by the likes of these woke groups.
Yes. And that's the main, I think that's one of the main takeaways. The other aspect, it's really shocking how much influence they could have, because we know, and my research showed, that there's a revolving door between these woke activist groups and the administrative agencies that are making these rules. And I love how you say we're all focused on Congress, and yet everything we should be focusing on is the administrative state. Because I see poll after poll after poll asking, are are you concerned about dark money in Congress? Are you concerned about dark money in elections? And it's like Americans say, oh yeah, we're concerned. We want to know who's funding these things. But almost never do you get the question, are you concerned about dark money in the administrative state that's actually making these rules? Congress, thankfully, is one of the most accountable to the American people of anything in our federal government. Every 2 years, every member of Congress has to get reelected. And so that creates a natural check on congressmen. And so, yes, congressmen do certain things. They abuse their power here or there, but there's always a check on them. They're always looking at the next election. Federal bureaucrats don't have that check. Many of these civil servants are in there for decades and making adjustments, changing rules, and working with external groups so that you have the revolving door. You have there was a scandal in 2009 where an agency, I think it was the Bureau of Land Management, they were essentially publishing memos that were written by a radical climate alarmist group. The alarmist group would send the memos, and then the agency would just publish the memos as if they were their own. And of course, the way that it all got resolved was in lieu of prosecution, there would be administrative action under the Obama administration, which if you trust that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you.
Yeah. So the thing that I found fascinating about your book is that in the past, I've looked at and talked about dark money and the groups, Arabella Advisors, George Soros, all this kind of stuff, defund democracy, or whatever it's called, demand justice. But
Yes.
for the first time, and this is why I was referencing the map that's in your book, you show the groups, you show what they're doing, and then where it's going to. So, we're going to have it up on the screen here. But for those people who are listening or can't, have microscopic reading, ability, give us a couple examples of how, like, who these groups are, what they're trying to do, and how they're infiltrating the agencies.
Yeah, there are a lot. So as you mentioned, my grand chart, I call it my Sheldon Whitehouse chart. It's a very beautiful mind.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Yes. And he's the guy who's always complaining about dark money on the right. And it's like, boy, do I have a story for you, Mr. Senator. But if you go through, the top line is big donors, and pretty much their role is just sending money. There's another line that is people who are donors and influencers. And then you have five massive blocks for each of the different influence campaigns where a lot of woke activist groups are in these groups. And then I have these lines, they're all over the place, going to federal agencies. And there are 438 agencies in the federal government. And of course, I don't have room on the chart for all 438 of them. But I have the clearest examples. So one of the big people I always talk about with this is Tracy Stone Manning. She is notorious for writing a letter on behalf of eco-terrorists who were doing tree spiking decades ago. And then President Biden decided he would nominate her to lead the Bureau of Land Management. She was at one of the woke climate alarmist groups. And then she went into the Bureau of Land Management. And now, after the Biden administration, she's back to a woke climate activist group. And so that's the revolving door aspect. Then there's an organization called Demos, which, a little known Illinois state senator by the name of Barack Obama was a founding board member of this group. Demos wrote an executive order, and this executive order would tell federal agencies to become voter registration offices so that you would have federal agencies, in their normal cause of business. When somebody goes to apply for food stamps, the bureaucrat would say, oh, by the way, do you want to register to vote? And their idea was that most of the people who are applying for federal handouts are probably going to vote in a certain direction, shall we say. This group wrote this executive order. This executive order was part of the H.R. 1, the Democrats' big Protecting Democracy bill in 2021. Well, that bill passes the Democratic House, fails in the Democratic Senate, never was even brought up for a vote. But Biden decided to implement parts of it anyway, and he implemented it by taking the order written by Demos, essentially copy-paste, signs this executive order, then tasks his administration, each of the different agencies, to go to Demos for advice on how to implement this executive order. Meanwhile, a few of the big people at Demos went over to head OIRA and a few other major federal agencies. So this influence campaign is throughout. We talk about who is really calling the shots in the Biden administration. When you have this man who, all of America saw how with it he was during that first debate with President Trump in 2024. But before that, everybody, all the media was deciding, let's hide this. Let's make sure that the American people don't raise questions about whether Biden is compos mentis. Well, who's really calling the shots? How did the president of the United States, theoretically the most powerful man on earth, get forced to drop out of a presidential election midway through? And part of my answer to that is this cabal, this vast network of these dark money funders like George and Alex Soros, Arabella Advisors, and the nonprofits they created, the really powerful money behind the Democratic Party, colluding with all of these nonprofits. I hope that my book has the research to lift back the curtain and show what exactly was going on and why it didn't seem to matter to so many people on the left that the president was barely there.
Is that because all of these left-wing people are infiltrating the government and they can pull their levers, and that's the goal?
Yes, I think that is pretty much like the main goal of these woke elites is to force their ideology on the American people. Partially, I don't know if they're actual believers in climate alarmism, gender ideology, and critical race theory, but if they're not, these are very useful tools to divide Americans and keep the real problems that Americans are suffering with hidden from the federal government while they're constantly focused on these chimeras.
So is it the case that like George Soros or Alex Soros, his son, have an agenda and that they're, I guess my question is, when you got that kind of money, why not just go through the front door? Why not buy off a bunch of congressmen, make a bunch of donations to Biden Inc. or whatever, and then just say, hey, I want this done? Like, why not just go that route?
Well, it's more of a both and. Alex Soros was constantly taking pictures with all of the major Democrats in the lead up to the 2024 election. He said he wanted to be more political than his dad. His dad wouldn't do that kind of things. He was a behind the scenes, George Soros is the perfect Emperor Palpatine figure in our politics. But his son, Alex, is changing the game, and he's going to be even more involved. And he actually did a lot of layoffs as soon as he took over Open Society. A lot of people, I don't think, realize that George Soros is no longer the driving force behind his big nonprofit. It's his son, Alex. And Alex is more aggressive in many ways than his father. So I think what we're going to see, and there was a recent interview where the interviewer asked Alex Soros if he would ever run for office. And he said, no, it's hard for me to see how I could have any more impact than I'm having right now.
Well, he's probably right.
It's just like, yeah, exactly. I don't think I can disagree with him.
So there was this, so for a long time, the problem with Washington is that Congress would pass something and it would go over to an agency, say. And the agency would say, okay, well, this is how we interpret that law. This is how we're going to enforce it. And then it would kind of just grow. Like they'd be like, we're also going to make you do this, make you do that. Last year, there was this case that decided by the Supreme Court, commonly now referred to as the Chevron case, that said basically, these agencies don't have the authority to do that. Congress needs to say, do A, do B, do C. You guys can't just make this up out of whole cloth. Does the Chevron case change this hypothesis that these deep staters are doing all this? Does it slow it down? Does it make any difference?
Yes, that case does make a big difference. So Chevron deference is the doctrine you're referring to, and that traces back to a lawsuit many, many decades ago. It was called Chevron v. NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. Natural Resources Defense Council happens to be one of the groups in my book that's been influencing the federal government. So, I think it's very clear. But Chevron established this procedure where courts would pretty much just say, when Congress passed a law that was vague, however the agency interpreted the law would stand. And what would happen is you'd get these people who are harmed by these agencies, and they'd look at the law that Congress passed and say, well, no, it didn't explicitly say that you could do this to me. And they would sue. And then that lawsuit would make it to the courts, and the courts would just say, they would throw up their hands and say, the agency has the final rule. Chevron is the reason why. And now that Chevron deference is thrown out, that means that Americans have the right again, thank God, to sue these agencies and actually get a chance at correcting when these agencies overstretch. So yes, Chevron is a very important, the recent ruling overturning Chevron is a very important step in the right direction. But it's only a step. There are a lot of other steps that need to be taken. That I mentioned some of them in my book. The research from my book really highlighted a lot. One of the main things is that public sector unions, a little-known guy by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, pretty much created our administrative state, former president. He said that public sector unions were a bad idea. And this is one of the few issues that I agree with Franklin Delano Roosevelt on, because he said the idea of having public servants represented by a union that is opposed to the people's elected representatives, who are their bosses, creates inherent problems with the way the government should work. And this is noxious. And FDR opposed them. Then, of course, under JFK, they got instituted, and now they've run amok. So one of the reasons you have a huge bloated federal workforce is you have these public sector unions that exist to lobby on behalf of public servants, turning them essentially into public serpents who oppose the people's elected representatives and want to stay in their jobs for as long as physically possible. Now these public sector unions are essentially the backbone, the big shield that the deep state can use to defend itself.
So let's kind of talk about all of this in the context of President Trump's new term. Let's just start with the agenda. I've said that this time is different. 4 years out of office has helped him rethink how to do everything and who to do it with. Are they able, when they talk about killing DEI and reshaping are they going to, like, what do you put their level and chances of success at?
That is an excellent question. This administration is far more focused, directed, and it's already achieving a lot more results than the previous administration did. I think Schedule F will be on target far
Which is
earlier.
what? Explain what that is.
Yes. So Schedule F is a really critical reform that President Trump implemented right at the end of his first term. And of course, it got blocked by Biden, so it never came into effect. But what it did was it reclassified federal workers so that a lot of these deep state actors who are, they are on their career bureaucrats, they were reclassified to say if they had any influence on policy, they would be reclassified as political, or, more or less they could be fired at will under Schedule F by the president if they were opposing his agenda. And so it's very important to have Schedule F brought back in. I think President Trump has already shown a lot of aggression in forcing the attacks on DEI. I think they're going to do a great job in rooting it out of the federal bureaucracy. For now, I'm very bullish. But what we're already seeing is a big effort from these very woke groups I wrote about in my book, these nonprofits, filing lawsuits to prevent the administration from doing what President Trump is lawfully ordering them to do. And I saw a very it was shocking in the sense that it hits you, but it wasn't necessarily that surprising. A poll that found that 64% of Washington, D.C. based federal bureaucrats, yeah, you know this,
I
who voted
retweeted
for
you the other
Kamala
day. I couldn't
Harris,
believe it.
yeah, they said they would not follow a lawful Trump order if they thought it was bad policy.
But Tyler, don't you
yeah.
see, to me, this is where, like, when all these people go, I can't believe that Trump's doing this, whatever. That's the poll that exemplifies why he needs to. Their job as an employee is to follow through and execute on lawful orders, right? And if they're basically saying in this poll, 64%, I'm not going to do it, then they shouldn't work there. If you're not going to do your job, then why are we paying you? We have elections to decide political leadership in this country.
Yeah, they should be fired. I mean, Rand Paul gave me a quote yesterday saying they should be fired en masse, every one of them who refuses to do this. And of course, he's right. Unfortunately, there are a lot of civil service protections that protect people and insulate some of these people. So the Trump administration is already, there are three levels of what bureaucrats are doing from these Biden holdovers. Some of them are going into the Woketopus to oppose the Trump administration from outside. Some of them are hunkering down, right? Some of them are considering what to do. And so when it comes to President Trump announced this week that there would be, at first it shocked me to hear this, but then I thought it was a brilliant move. He decided that if a federal bureaucrat wants to resign by February 6th, then they will get their pay and benefits through the end of September, through the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. And they will, they won't be working. They'll be on administrative leave, but they'll be able to collect a big paycheck. At first I thought, wait a second, you're having the American people pay federal workers not to work. There's a problem here. But then I thought a second time and I thought, well, if there are deep staters who are on the fence, if there are people who say, look, I've been working remotely for years, I don't want to work in the office. Also, I could hang out and I could stay in the government and I could try to oppose Trump from within. I want to do that, but it might be hard. They're launching things like Doge. They're launching efforts to make sure that that is less likely. I have an option now as an off-ramp, a very attractive option to just go, okay, why not? I'll take the paycheck,
right,
and then move on.
How many people? Give me a guess right now, because I think Elon or someone said something like potentially 10%. What do you, if you had to guess right now, like come February 6th, I think that was the date, right?
Right.
What would you say Tyler O'Neill's guess is? How many, what percentage of the federal workforce takes the deal?
I'm going to put it at 8. I'm not going to be as bullish as Elon, but I do. This is a crazy good deal. I mean, if you're. But
wait, hold on. So let's. This is what I can't look. Maybe I'm missing something here. I get it. Basically, hey, I tell you I'm resigning February 6th. You'll pay me till September. So my math isn't great, but what's that? 7 months of pay?
More than 7, yeah.
Okay, so you get the whole summer off too. But one, I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, the nice thing about the federal government, to be honest, is, these guys, they got all sorts of protection. It's a nice retirement plan. They got built-in vacation days for everything. I mean, and you're rolling the dice to say, I hope there's a job for me in October, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I think people who are in the federal government, and there's a lot of great people who work for a government. I've been in and out of government, so I'm not trying to be disparaging, but I think for a lot of them, the security of a job is part of the reason they took it. It's not for the paycheck usually. Right?
In the private sector? In the private sector, this offer would probably result in at least 25%.
Right. But the idea of, if I got 15 years in the federal government, I got 5 till I can retire and get my benefits for life. Why would I do this?
Yeah. Well, that's why I don't think it's going to be higher than 10%.
Oh, right. But I still think, so the reason I was shocked at your number, Tyler, is because I think it's more like 3. I mean, because I think enough of these guys are like, why would I do that? I got this sweet gig, and I'll fight. I've got a union that protects me. I get a guaranteed COLA every year. It's a pretty sweet gig.
Yeah.
If you're entrepreneurial and then you're probably not going into the federal government.
Well, the union is scared. The
Well,
the
less
unions
less
the
less
unions are
people,
scared
less money.
of Trump. Yeah. No, I mean, I think I don't know how much they rely on the union when so if you are a younger worker, and of course my age might be showing in my high estimate here, but like I'm 35, I've got a lot of work ahead of me. But, even many of the federal bureaucrats who are, who are on the younger side might look at it and say, I've got a good, and you got to remember a lot of these Woketopus nonprofits are pretty cushy jobs too. There are a lot of people,
Right, but you
and there are
never
a lot
know.
of
You don't have the same
universities.
protection at any nonprofit that you do in the federal government.
That's true. But you could end up making more money. And, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm too bullish. Maybe you're
No, no.
right. We'll
You know
see
what?
how
On
many they
February
come
6th, you
out.
and I are going to trade
Yeah,
texts and see who's right.
we
You
should.
mentioned a bunch of these groups. Obviously, we've heard you got in the chart. You got Soros. We've all heard of Soros. And then you kind of named it, and then the Rockefeller Group, I was intrigued by just seeing some of their stuff. But you also talk
Yeah.
about Amalgamated Charitable Foundation. Like,
Oh
walk us
my.
through who's
Yes.
that?
So, Amalgamated Charitable Foundation is a foundation set up by Amalgamated Bank. They are a union
They're the
bank
Union Bank, right?
started by one of the largest unions in America. This union, so Amalgamated Charitable is among the worst actors, in my opinion, because I'm sure you're familiar with the Southern Poverty Law Center, right?
Oh, dude! By the way, I love when you wrote about that. I think there's an example with Ted Cruz, but that's a joke. Those people literally, and the total. Yeah. Anyway, I think
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, the left needs to realize they're a joke, and the Biden White
Don't
House
they
needed
love
to
them?
realize they were a joke. Exactly. That's the problem. You and I know that they're a joke, but so many on the left, to most people on the left, they're a useful weapon because the SPLC, for those who don't know, it started, it gained notoriety by suing Ku Klux Klan groups into bankruptcy. And then it created this map that it put conservatives on the map with Klan groups. So now you have Family Research Council, Alliance Defending Freedom, even Gays Against Groomers now, and Parents Defending Education, Moms for Liberty. All these people are on a map with Klan chapters set up by the group that is best known for suing Klan groups into bankruptcy. So this is like defamation on an absurd scale. This hate map inspired a domestic terrorist attack in 2012. So it should not be taken seriously at all. In the Biden administration, federal agencies and federal law enforcement agencies were citing the Southern Poverty Law Center. The notorious anti-Catholic memo at the FBI was doing this, but also the DOJ and education officials met with the SPLC while they were putting Moms for Liberty on the hate map. Biden nominated an SPLC attorney to a top federal judgeship. And the reason I got off on this tangent is because the Amalgamated Bank has a project called Hate is Not Charitable, where they say that, this is an ETF. The charitable industry has a lot of different ways that they direct donors' money certain places. They advise you. There are donor advised funds. Anyway, they pressure people to cut off from any sort of charitable funding any organization that is on the SPLC's hate map. And this is a project that they launched. I believe it was in 2017 or 2018. From what I can see, it's still going. And this is the debanking attack.
Right.
And it is mainstream. And President Trump was 100% right to talk about it.
Unbelievable. I mean, that's what's so funny is that I read these. There's so many of the things in the book that I was like, I'm glad you brought up. The Southern Poverty Law Center to me is a total joke that's got the media wrapped around their finger so that when they get outraged about something, everybody talks about them deciding to be a hate group. And the example that you had in the book that I thought was so great, and you're going to correct me because I probably am going to butcher this, but they went after Cruz or something, right? Because he quoted a political story.
Yes. So he quoted a Politico story about the funding behind the anti-Israel riots. Yeah, and you're exactly right. They quoted Ted Cruz quoted the story and said, "Oh, isn't it horrible that George Soros is funding these anti-Israel riots?" The SPLC comes out and says, "This is anti-Semitic rhetoric." because
You
George
can't quote
Soros
Politico.
happens to be Jewish.
Right.
Well, yes, you can't quote Politico. You can't criticize anti-Israel rioters, don't you know? It's anti-Semitic.
Oh, by the way, it was funny,
Yeah.
total side note, but in the Kennedy hearing, one of the senators goes after Bobby, and they say, did you say the following? He said, well, I was reading an NIH study. And they go, but did you say it? And he's like, well, I said what the study was. I directly quoted it. And they're like, but you said it. And he's like, yeah, but I was literally just reading an NIH study. And they were like, okay, but you said it. Like anyway, I love the example in there. Congratulations on the book. By the way, did I miss this? Because I know that in the book you reference how they always talk about the Woketopus or whatever, how to define the right. Yeah,
yes.
How did you come up with the name?
Yeah, so there are a few. Mainly, it was the Woketopus, which they all attacked
because of the Koch brothers,
right?
And they're
Koch
funny on the right,
tentacles,
right? So that's
in government,
right.
But this is the Woketopus, which is a much bigger, not only a bigger dark money network, but also bigger influence on the federal government, and on American culture overall. So it's, yeah.
Well, congratulations to you, and obviously love all the work that's going on over there at the Daily Signal. So look forward to catching up with you guys again soon.
Thank you so much, Sean.
All right. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thanks. All right. That was fascinating. I can't believe all this is happening. I knew about the groups, but I didn't know what was going on in the government and their influence. Like, I'm telling you, that chart is worth buying the book alone. All those notes are in the show notes if you go to YouTube or Rumble. By the way, now I want to end on a high note. We've had a tough week. We talk about DEI. We talk about everything else. A good friend of mine, Jeff Nelligan, wrote a book, 4 Lessons from My 3 Sons, How You Can Raise Resilient Kids. And it's a reminder that not only can we buy stuff, but how we can be better examples to the kids, because they need parents more than ever. I want to introduce you to my good friend, Jeff Nelligan, and the author of 4 Lessons from My 3 Sons, How You Can Raise Resilient Kids. Jeff, good to see you. I wanted to end the weekend with get into the weekend with a discussion with you, because I love this book that you've got out, the updated version of this, because we talk about DEI and woke culture and everything, but at the end of the day, like, it still comes back to good parenting when it comes to raising kids. And I think the lessons that you offer in this book, I mean, 2 of your kids are naval officers. One made the mistake of following your footsteps at West Point, and then I don't know what other. But the thing that I thought was so fascinating after you and I were connecting and I was reading some of the stuff is this principle of showing up that you talk about in the book in sports. So walk us through why you've kind of honed in on that one thing.
Yeah, because what you're doing, Sean, is and by the way, it's a privilege to be on, my friend. This is great. Long time no see and all that. You're modeling for your kid what you want them to be. And this may sound, a little bit out there, but I showed up to virtually everything that they ever did at their school, even sometimes driving from downtown, from the Hill, or from HHS, GAO, wherever, all the way to a game. It might be in Baltimore, it might be in Bethesda, and then driving back at night. The reason I did it was they always felt better, I felt, seeing the old man on the sideline, even if they weren't even going to get in the game. And the second thing I did is I always wore a suit and tie or a jacket and tie, because I would tell them, these games mean a lot to you. The wins are huge, the losses hurt. And so I'm trying to show respect for what you guys are trying to do, and that I'm behind you 100%.
Yeah, I was going to go there, because that's when I read that part of it, I was like, oh, come on, Nelligan, don't do this to me, because I'm not perfect, but my parents were always there for me. Always. They showed up at everything, practices, whatever. And I wanted to be that same way, kind of like you're talking about with my kids. Like, so if there's something, I try to show up. But then I'm reading this thing about, I show up in a coat and tie. There's one example, you're playing, warming up the lacrosse goalie in a suit. And I'm like, I don't even wear a tie here, and you're getting dressed up for games. Now, here's the thing. I guess my question is, and on Saturdays, I roll in sweatpants and a t-shirt. But, I get your point. But, I mean, I'll wear a suit and tie or something to church or something. But, why do you deem it so important to get all dressed up? Because now I'm feeling now I'm feeling guilty. I was like, okay,
Well, most of the times I was coming from work because they were weekday games, weekday school events, a parent-teacher conference. On the weekends, yeah, I would tone it down. I might wear just a collared shirt, long pants, but it was the idea that, you know, the respect that I had for them and the coaches and their teammates. And I was doing this even when Junior was at West Point playing rugby, on a national championship team as a first team All-American. I would show up. But then when he went to the pros, got a waiver from Secretary of Defense Austin, I figured I didn't have to set any examples anymore because this guy was in the pros and he was setting now an example for me.
I think that it's so interesting because in this day and age, it's almost like as parents we're competing with phones. Like when I try to have a rule, like when we're eating dinner, it's, hey, no phones. Even in the car, I try to say, all right, guys, like we're going to talk to each other. But it's harder and harder, I think, and yet more and more important for parents to play that role in society today.
Yeah, it is. And, the parents have to be the bad guy. A typical teen, just a few stats, spends 8 hours and 47 minutes on a day on a phone, and that doesn't include schoolwork. And Pew notes just last December that 48% of kids say that they spend virtually the entire day online. YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Those are the three biggest sites. And the parent has just got to be the bad guy and say, no more. And it takes, there's going to be friction and there's going to be arguments, but limiting the access to that digital device is key because a kid on a digital device is in a passive mode, taking in all of the sewer that is the interweb. So my kids didn't get a phone until they were in 11th grade, at the end of 11th grade. And we used to have contests, Sean, you'll love this, who could come home with a phone the most charged. And so they would come back to the house with 98, 99% charged, knowing that they hadn't really used it during the day.
That's kind of a great, I don't know that it'll work anymore. My kids would be like, yeah, I'll lose right now. The thing that's interesting is you talk about the role of sports and how they play a critical role in the kids' discovery process and their growth and what they learn to like and not like and how to fit in. Is it your contention? I get your experience with your kids was largely sports, but let's say a parent's watching this right now, a grandparent saying, hey, my kid's not athletically inclined or whatever. Like, what is it your case that it's got to be sports, or could it be drama club or band?
Great point. Because every kid is not going to be good at sports. I don't know what you played at Portsmouth Abbey, but I will tell you some of the best times of my life were spent at your school on a lacrosse field many, many summers. But you're exactly right. Not every kid's going to be good at sports, and there's going to be plenty of kids who are sitting on the bench for 6 or 7 years. Band, drama club, the theater, the robotics club, the scouts, anything that puts a kid in a group of like-minded individuals with supportive parents where they're working towards a goal and they have to get along with each other, even if they don't like some of the people that they're with. It's essential for building that kind of character that ultimately leads, like, my 3 sons, the 2 naval officers and the 1 wayward Army officer, being able to have that personal conduct, that confidence, that resilience in adversity, and, finally developing that ambition to get better every day.
I think the other thing that I thought was great is that you talk about the importance of losses, and I actually a huge believer in that as well, because it's not just losses, but it's going through things you don't like. I tell people all the time, one of the best internships I ever had is the one that I hated the most, because it taught me what I don't like as much as what I like. But I think that there's part of this is that if everything is roses and buttercups and rainbows, then you never experience adversity, and you never learn to be tough. And there are lessons from losses. There's a sense of, as we say in the military, AAR is like looking at what could we have done better? How can we improve? How much more do I need to work out? How much more do I need to practice? But that comes through losing sometimes.
Yeah, losing is essential. I mean, because, an AAR, your after action report, just like you say, no one gets a free ride in life. And a kid hitting a bind or an obstacle on Monday is going to hit one on Thursday, just like every adult hits them. We've all had them, and particularly in politics. But the idea of losing and just taking a look at yourself and say, hey, wait a minute, you can't get complacent with this. You've got to change. And that's the best kind of forge a kid is going to go through. And ultimately, he's going to win or start to win.
Yeah. I do love the fact that you go through that it's not just the game itself, but it's also the, tucking in your shirt, looking a coach in the eye, learning how to shake a good hand. I mean, there's an aspect of like life and lessons in that washing your own uniform, things like that I think are helpful. But I want to end it on a Friday with like this. You touched on something where you say humor is the operative factor for reaching a kid. No kid responds to lectures, but responds to a gag, a one-liner, a quip. Is there anything that was your go-to?
Always self-deprecation of myself. Always just saying, hey, your dad's not this good at that, or he's dropping every 10th ball you're throwing to him on a lacrosse field. Your dad's got to get better. And always that humor that, once I lost my job at the end of the Bush 43, and we were all sent home and sitting there on a field at Landon up there in Bethesda, we were throwing the ball around. And I said, let's go get the donuts. And a kid said, wait a minute, Dad, you just lost your job. We don't have the money. And I said, guys, it's the end of the world, in this very mocking kind of tone. I said, look, we're going to be fine. I'll rally. I got to get better at throwing it downfield. And I'll tell you, the minute we can't afford those donuts, I will tell you. But for now, the operative word is, it's the end of the world. Ha, ha, ha. And that completely changed the way they approach, just as you say, those losses that they encountered in their own lives.
All right, Jeff, again, the name of the book is 4 Lessons for My 3 Sons, How You Can Raise Resilient Kids. So excited to reconnect and glad and so proud of you for the second edition of this book.
Hey, thanks, man. It means a lot. It does.
You bet. All right, take care.
All right, man.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us on this Friday. We will be back on Monday. Go to my newsletter, SeanSpicer.com. Sign up for exclusive behind-the-scenes info and pictures, all sorts of fun. We'll be back at 9 a.m. live on this channel for the morning meeting. And then 6 o'clock today, we're going to continue to bring you insight in all the nominations and the happenings of the Trump administration. Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.